Hello everyone. Let me begin by wishing everyone a ksiva v'chsima teva, the traditional blessing for a sweet and new year, that we should all be inscribed in the book of life, in good health, nachas, joy from each other, from our families, from our loved ones, a year of peace, a year of harmony, both in Israel and all over the world, a year of personal and global redemption. We titled the class as a pre-Rosh Hashanah workshop, A New World Being Born as the World Trembles. It's based on a prayer that we say on Rosh Hashanah. The prayer is Hayom Haras Olam, which Haras literally can be translated, today the world trembles, and Haras also comes from the word birth, today the world is born. Is there a more apt way to describe the world in which we live? You go back to the year, beginning of this last Hebrew year, Tavshinai Daled, which the corresponding English date is approximately September 2013. We're now in September 2014. And was relatively a calmer period. As usual, no one could have expected or imagined the events that would start taking place in this world. Let's begin with the events in Russia and Ukraine, the events that began in the Middle East, Hamas attacking, kidnapping and then attacking Israel with the rockets, the battle in Gaza, the wars in Gaza. And of course, what has dominated the news in the last few weeks and months, ISIS, the rise of ISIS or ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or as the president and others call it, ISIL, which is even more foreboding, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, which is the entire Middle Eastern Mesopotamian region. And the barbaric behavior and beheadings and so on. So the world is shaking all over the place. People are wondering about America's role. Many people feel America is paralyzed. Without getting into analysis of that, so as we stand here at the dawn of a new year, as the curtain comes down on the year 5774, the Hebrew year, and the new year 5775, what better way to express these times as the world is trembling? Hayom Haras Olam. But as we said, the world is also being born, and that's what I'd like to discuss. A way to enter the new year. Remember, Rosh Hashanah is not just a Jewish holiday, it's a universal holiday. It's the birth of the universe, the birth of the human race. We actually honor the birthday, Rosh Hashanah, not the birth of the universe, which was 6 days earlier, but on the sixth day of creation, when Adam and Eve were created according to the Bible, that's when we honor Rosh Hashanah. So 5,775 years ago, we recreate what happened then. Because the human race are the ones responsible, the stewards of this world, who will either ensure that the world will reach its ultimate purpose, a spiritual world, a world that becomes a divine home, a world of complete fusion between matter and spirit, or God forbid, will we be the cause of destruction. And this is a choice we have. Rosh Hashanah poses that choice straight into our hands. The Talmud, the Mishnah says that every human being created in the same way that Adam was created as an individual, Adam and Eve as an individual, is responsible to say the whole world was created for me. Not selfish for selfish purposes, but for responsible purposes. Because the world, we have the ability, as we've seen, we have the ability to tame the elements, to control forces far greater than us, and either harness it for selfish gain and even destructive purposes, God forbid, or to make the world a far better place and fulfill the purpose of its existence. Rosh Hashanah is that day. When we say it's the day of judgment, that's what it means. The judgment of the universe, the renewal of its contract, the revisiting of its mission statement and purpose. And this is both collective, the collective human race, and the individual. Because ultimately the human race is made up of individuals like you and I. 7 billion people like you and I have this choice. That's why the Rosh Hashanah prayers are so much focused around the discussion about the creation of the world. But there's actually a very interesting prayer that we say in the Musaf. That's the additional prayer we say Rosh Hashanah afternoon, after the sounding of the shofar. We say the verse, Al Medina's Boya Omer. On this day, the destiny of nations is determined. And it was always known, especially by the leaders and by the mystics, that what happens in Rosh Hashanah can determine the destiny of empires and nations of the coming year. So we pray on Rosh Hashanah, not just for our own personal peace and our own personal gain and our own personal success and welfare, we also pray for the welfare of the entire world. So when you see a world that's trembling and shaking and shuddering, this is the time of the year when we think about that. Now you could say, hey, what do I really care about the world as long as my little world is fine? Well, first of all, everything that happens in the larger world is happening to us as well. Yeah, we may be living in a very peaceful, comfortable environment, but we saw September 11th, 13 years ago, which frankly was exactly the same thing right before Rosh Hashanah. It was just a few days before the Rosh Hashanah of that year, 13 years ago. We also felt we're pretty much safe, and then suddenly, God forbid. And I'm not suggesting that will happen or could happen again, but let's not kid ourselves. We're living in a world that's very volatile. We're living in a world of people who are definitely interested in attacking, and they see the West as the great Satan. And we're not talking about a few people. We see them declaring it. We see them acting on it. We see how they've done to American citizens, with very little being done in return. Yes, there's the bombings, there's President Obama's declaration, but war is war. Either you fight completely or you don't fight at all. I think we learned that lesson in World War II. Hitler also began as just a small little guy, and then a small little group, and everyone thought in the 20s and 30s, early 30s, that nothing could come of them because the country would never tolerate such radical positions. And then they controlled all of Germany and almost all of the world, and we know the consequences. Obviously, you cannot compare generation to generation, but hey, you're dealing with a Muslim world that's fighting a religious war. Now, I understand not all Muslims, as we've discussed many times, and that's not necessarily the theme, but I just thought to point at it, that we're living in a world that is a clash. There is a clash going on, and it's coming to a head. And whether we like it or not, the Muslims that are imposing it are saying it's a war against the Crusader Zionist plot. They're invoking the names of battles that have been fought for over centuries. First the Christians and the Muslims, the Jews always smack in the middle, Israel always at the center of the fires, the center of the firestorms brewing. So it's critical to understand that just to go back and put our heads into the sand and burrow into our little groves and say, hey, it doesn't affect me, no, that's not an appropriate approach. That's not appropriate. So what do we have? We have to think about it. Number one, that it does affect. And number two, to go on a deeper level, the human being is a Elam Katan. We are a small universe. And one of the most beautiful and eloquent ideas in Judaism, which Rosh Hashanah so epitomizes, is your one act affects the entire world. Not just in the butterfly effect that we know today, that one small thing here can affect things millions of miles away, but also because we are the universe of microcosm. Esa Elam Nosan Belibam. God placed the earth and the universe into your heart and soul. And that's why, if you look in physics, you'll find that the atom and the subatomic structures are universal. Wherever you go, you have the same elements. That means that our behavior and actions affect more than just ourselves, and vice versa. There are lessons to be learned from the events in the world, also in our personal lives. So let's go back and analyze Hayoim Haras Olam, this double meaning, double entendre, double meaning expression, trembling and birth. Seemingly, there's two very, very different antithetical ideas. Birthing is a blessing. The birth of something is born. And then we say trembling is fear, shuddering, retreating, etc. But the truth is, if you study it and just think about it for a moment, you'll see they're actually interdependent. All birthing happens after a tremble. And all trembles, when understood properly, can lead to a birthing and should lead to a birthing. You look, for example, when an egg hatches. So the hatching egg, the egg cracks open. Why does it have to crack? Why does an egg have to crack in order for the chick to cry out, because the egg served its purpose while the chick was gestating. It had to be protected. Had the egg been open or cracked, it would be prone to infection, predators, or other things that could in some way compromise the growing fetus. But when the time comes, now the egg cracks, that state has to melt away, has to shed in order to allow a new state to enter. This is a common principle in Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, and I'll introduce it here in the terms of yesh, ayin, yesh, which means a state of itness, followed by a vacuum or a void, an emptiness, ayin, leading to another yesh, to another state of being. Any growth, and the greater the growth, any birthing, any genesis, always requires these three steps. Why? Because if you don't have that metamorphosis, you don't have change, you don't have growth. Then you're just an extension of what was. Let's speak psychologically. You can be in a situation where, let's say, your patterns are, your habits are leading you to nowhere. They're causing you trouble. So you'll say, I'd like one morning you wake up and say, I want things to be different. What's going to change? If you continue the behavior that you did before, you're going to have the same results. As I often like to say, when you think what you thought and you say what you said and you do what you did, what are you going to have? What you had. If nothing changes, nothing changes. It's cause and effect. What do they call insanity? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. For something to shift, you need to shift something. You need a metamorphosis. A caterpillar goes into its womb, into its cocoon, I should say. The chrysalis, only to emerge as a butterfly. And human birth is the same thing. Right? And when that transition is about to take place, something has to give. So if you only appeared when the egg was cracking, and you saw nothing before, nothing after, you'd say, why are eggs cracking? It doesn't look good. It's a tremble, it's a shudder. Why is a seed rotting and eroding in the earth? It looks like it's being destroyed. Why is a woman crying and screaming when she's about to give birth and her insides literally split open? Why do we need frustration that precedes creativity? The confusion when you're gathering a lot of information and you're not sure what to do. Because you're going through in all of them, there's a transition, a new growth, a new birth is taking place. And when there's a new birth, there's always going to be a crack before that. Some shattering, some tremble, some shudder. Now, if you don't see it through, or you're not wise enough to understand the context, you can see this as an end in itself, you see a tremble. The world, my friends, today is going through real shudders. You know, we find the Bible, in the Torah, and I'm talking about Chumash, there are more times outside of Chumash, meaning in Tanakh, but in the Bible, 3 times we hear the word shuddering, a shudder, a tremble. One, when Isaac heard that Esau said, what happened to my prayers? And he realized that Jacob had stolen those prayers, so he said a great shudder, he shuddered. The second time is when the brothers of Joseph were accused of what's in your packages by Joseph. They didn't know it was Joseph. They shuddered a great shudder. And the third time is when the Jews stood at Sinai. They said they shuddered, and the mountain itself shuddered. Shuddered with a D, shuddered, trembled. And the Midrashim and the commentaries explain the commonality between them. Some say Joseph's brothers shuddered. That was essentially a repayment because they were the children of Jacob, and Jacob suffered his anguish over the loss of Joseph. In his mind, for 22 years, he thought he was dead. Was like a so-called retribution for Jacob causing his father to shudder. And then there's the shuddering that happens at Sinai. All 3 of them were watershed moments where there was a shift in history. Now is not the place to go into long details about all the expressions of this, but I will say the following. When Jacob took the blessings from Joseph, when Jacob took the blessings from Esau, a major shift took place. Isaac wanted to give the blessings to his son Esau. Rebecca plotted with her son Jacob, and he got the blessings. So I've discussed this a number of times, and if you send us an email at meaningfullife.com, we have a whole article on this topic. But briefly, something happened there. What happened? That had Esau been able to get the blessings himself, that would have been great. But Esau was the warrior, and he would not have known how to harness and to channel these blessings, so they had to go through Jacob. So in a sense, it was a reminder that the world has a dissonance between matter and spirit. And Jacob taking the blessings was a first shift. Another shift took place when Joseph was sold into slavery, and the Jews began their Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim, and Joseph began the descent to Egypt. Because remember, had Joseph not been sold to slavery, the Jews would never have gone to Egypt. Yes, it was to save them from the famine, but it ultimately led them to what? To the exile in Egypt and the exodus from Egypt, which is a major watershed moment. All taking place there in that conflict between Joseph and his brothers. And they shuddered. They shuddered consciously or unconsciously about the events that were about to unfold. And finally, Sinai itself, of course, is maybe the greatest event in all history. What was the shudder there? Spirit and matter were meeting together. And when spirit and matter collide, there's always going to be a shudder. There's always going to be a tremble. Because they're not consistent with each other. There's a dissonance, there's a dichotomy. Matan Torah, it says, up to that point, there was a split, a gzera, and a decree that which was above could not come down below, and that which below did not go up above. Basically, matter and spirit were mutually exclusive. Matan Torah did what Jacob did when he took the blessings, and what what happened when Joseph was coming together with his brothers, and first the conflict between Joseph, which was Talmud's knowledge, academia, and Yehuda, who was the prime archenemy, so to speak, of Joseph. First of all, he led the way, and secondly, he was the one that was supposed to have kingship and leadership. The conflict between the mind and action, Talmud and Maisa. And all this is part of that dissonance between a material world, and its spiritual purpose. Later, Judah and Joseph split, or you could say the split between the tribes, the 10 tribes, and Judah and Benjamin, ended up creating the split in the two kingdoms, which itself was a major event in history, and till today remains one of the splits. When Mashiach comes, the world of future, when there'll be total fusion between matter and spirit, all these dichotomies, all these dissonances will connect. But the shudder is there because it reminds us of two worlds colliding. Just to elaborate a moment in case I wasn't clear enough, as I said, I have an article about this that explains it more in detail, but just to embellish a bit, Judah and Joseph represent the dichotomy we all have between mind and action. Our minds tell us one thing, and they don't always come into action. It's another manifestation of the split between matter and energy. It's like what you do doesn't reflect who you are. So both are necessary, and both are important. You need to know, understand, you need to study, but you also need to act. Bertrand Russell may be captured at best in our modern times when he was asked by the board at Oxford or Cambridge, I believe, where he was asked by the board, how could you behave unethically? He was caught doing something that was inappropriate. So you're a professor of ethics, and his response was classic. He said, I'm also a professor of mathematics, and I'm not a triangle. Which means there's a split between who you are and what you teach and what you know. But Judaism demands seamlessness. As Maimonides says, who's the wise person? Not just the great orator, the scholar, the brilliant mind. The wise person is one whose actions are consistent with his beliefs. How he walks, how he talks, how he sleeps, how he eats, how he drinks, how he does business, how he deals with small things, small matters, that's consistent with his wisdom. Joseph and Yehuda represented these two worlds, and ultimately Judah is meant to be the leader. But when Joseph became the leader, it emphasized where mind is controlling or is more powerful than necessarily bringing it into the action. But both are necessary. So all these shudders were reflective of a shift, of a change. And when there's a change, there will always be a shudder. So how do we look at the events today? Hayom Hara Selam. Today the world trembles, but today the world is born. That's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. The Arizal, the holy Arizal, puts it so eloquently and poetically he says, as the sun is about to set, before Rosh Hashanah begins, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, which will be this coming Wednesday evening, a week from tonight, the world goes into a comatose state, like a slumber, a tremble, in anticipation of its rebirth, of awaiting the renewal of its contract. So it's a fascinating way to look at the cosmos and existence itself. Existence isn't just what appears on the surface. Sun rises every morning, the moon in the evening, everything going through its clockwork motion. No, there are forces at work that are keeping this place alive. And there are times in the year, namely the eve of Rosh Hashanah, where the entire universe, on a deep unconscious level, goes into a shudder, into a sleep, into a slumber, anticipating, trembling, whether it will be renewed. It is very reminiscent of that third shudder I mentioned by Mount Sinai. One of the reasons we blow shofar Rosh Hashanah is a reminder of the shofar that was heard at Sinai. And the shofar was part of the trembling world. The trembling world, the shofar was very loud and it elicits a shudder. Ar yeshag mila yira is sometimes used to understand the blowing of the shofar. It's like the roar of a lion, and it causes mila who does not tremble. And what does the Talmud say about Sinai? It says, Eretz Yara v'Shakata. That at Sinai, the earth that was so trembling and fearful up till that moment finally got silenced. Why? Because the whole purpose of existence is in order to create fusion between matter and spirit. But until that happens, there's a terrible tremble. Because when you look at the material world, and I ask each of you and myself as well to look at our lives, what do you consume with all day? Materialism, survival, whatever it takes to make ends meet, which then spills over into selfishness and greed and self-interest and all that leads to. It doesn't have to, but this material world's a very selfish world. And when you grow older, you start thinking and become cynical. Is it really possible for us to really love each other? Does anyone really do anything for altruistic purposes, or everyone has some agenda? Everything is a give and take. And if you think about it, if you're a person that's honest, you start shuddering. What kind of world is this? Is there hope for this universe? So yes, we've learned to coexist. We have red lights and green lights, and we've written laws. But then we look around today, you see nations at throats of other nations. You see an uprising going on in the Middle East, and they firmly believe in God and say this is God's will. You say, how could that be God's will to behead and destroy other people? And if you step back, you say, 1 second, what are they thinking? We're not talking about insane people. Why are they so different than our thinking? You think you can have two different people, two different opinions, coexist. No, it's not exist. There's no coexistence. Why can't we agree to disagree? No, it's blood, it's death, it's killings. Look what was going on for months in Israel. Indiscriminate bombing of what? Of anybody. Civilians. You have a grievance, come to the table. Why don't you talk about it? You may not always get what you want. What did the Jews do after World War II? Did we go bomb the cafes and the innocent civilians of Germany? Our avengers, we rebuilt our country. So how could this not lead to a shudder and a tremble when you think about the world, both collectively and individually? You look around. I read an article, someone said, beheadings in the Middle East and Iraq. We behead each other metaphorically every day at Wall Street. People kill each other for a few dollars. Litigation, anger, hatred, pride. Okay, obviously, it's a metaphor. We can't compare the two. But emotionally, we also kill each other. What are some parents doing to children in abusive homes? What are we doing to each other when we're negligent? How much death is going on, emotional death and spiritual death, every given moment? So if you step back and you're someone that's been seasoned, if you're naive and idealistic and young person, you could say, I believe that the world is a better place. But once you get taste the taste of death and the taste of fear, and you see selfishness, you think differently. You start seeing a world that is at odds with each other. Yara, Eretz Yara. There's much to tremble about. And many people, Rosh Hashanah, that's all they do, they tremble. But there's another half. The world did not create itself. If you go like Einstein and others say, if you want to solve a problem, you have to go outside of the system. If you go to the system that's corrupt, obviously corruption cannot remedy corruption. That's why we have, thank God, a God. Someone put this world into its place. Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. Even if you're a skeptic, tell me, is there no other hope or solution unless you have some form of God that's outside of the system that says, I put it here and I have a purpose. And even in the conflicts that you people experience, even in your self-interest and the selfishness and greed that sometimes spills over into emotional war, psychological war, and even physical war. With all the deaths, there's still hope because there's a creator in there somewhere. And I created this universe, and I gave you, the human race, a part of myself. You're created in a divine image. You have the ability to go outside of the system. Though you may be part of the problem, or even the cause of the problem, you can also be the solution. So you can be the cause of the disease, but you can find the cure because you have a divine image in which you were created. Elicit the divine. Draw it forth from within your soul. And despite all that you have seen in life, don't lose that idealism. Don't lose that pintala yid, that spark. That's what I ask you to do on Rosh Hashanah. That's Rosh Hashanah. Revisiting the world before its fall. Revisiting the world as it was created with a purpose. A world where the destiny of nations is determined, the mandate is renewed, the contract is renewed, and yes, there is hope. That's what Rosh Hashanah is telling us. A new beginning, the world is being recreated now. It's trembling. It's trembling because when you look at it with your physical eyes, you say, look what's going on. The world is burning. Is there any hope? Is there any hope between Muslims and Jews ever making peace? Any hope with ISIS and ISIL? Any hope with Israel and its neighbors? So if you think of it, you say, I'm a pragmatic person, very practical. No way. They hate each other. Look what's going on. Every time you speak peace, it never works. That's all within the system. Comes Rosh Hashanah and says, go back to the source. Go back to the engine room. Let's revisit the source code using digital language. Let's revisit the source code. If you're going to deal with the symptoms, you're going to deal with things on the surface level. So your problem is a problem caused by people who caused the problem. Those people are not going to find the solution. But if you go deeper, and that's what Rosh Hashanah allows us to go, as the Arizal says, the whole world goes into a slumber in anticipation of renewal. So it's not just the same of that we had till now. It's not more of the same. As the cynics say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's not more of the same. There is going to be a new energy entering into existence this Wednesday night, next week. And it has the power to change the world. It can come and go in the sense if we can ignore it. There are many things that happen in the universe and we don't feel. You can walk into a room and be insensitive and you won't know there's energy that you can access. How much potential do we have that we don't access? So we're told that next Wednesday night, there'll be a new energy that will enter existence. It's a new energy that will affect the entire universe. And we have the ability to access it, but you have to dig for it. It's not just going to be automatic and magic. Because as long as you're part of the problem, obviously, even if the energy is there, it cannot change you. You have to be receptive to it. And if you can calm some of your passions and just allow yourself to absorb and to channel, you can actually bring change into your life and into the world. That's what it is. If you're going to just go back to your old program, so you'll just continue doing what you've done till now. That's what Rosh Hashanah offers us. And that's Hayem Harasel. And yes, it trembles. It trembles because you look at a world, material world is very separate from the spiritual. Isaac, the brothers of Joseph, the tribes, and the Jews at Sinai all felt the shudder. But then comes Matan Torah and it says, Yara V'Shakota. If you also recognize the purpose of the shudder is a wake-up call. It's a crack to tell you that there's something wrong. If there would be no crack, you can convince yourself it's like a market correction. A reality check. And a crack that lets the light in. The crack that allows the egg to be shed for a new life to emerge. The crack is necessary because we're dealing with real change. The world is not in that shape. So these two contradictions seemingly are actually completely interdependent. The dissonance of this world, of matter disconnected from its purpose, the disconnect between who you are and what you do, your own personal dissonance, that itself, when you're aware of it and it makes you shudder, that's the beginnings of a birth. If you're not aware of it and it does not make you shudder, then you're in your comfort zone. That would be like, God forbid, a person who has the disease and they think all's cool, everything's fine. Being aware and feeling the dissonance causes one to shudder, and that causes hayay maras elam for one to be born. That's what Rosh Hashanah offers us. So now let's bring it back to the Middle East and to the events in our time. God should protect us all from any type of pain, any loss, any death, especially gruesome. Yet when you look at the whole picture, you have to say, what's going on? What is the world going through? It's going through a transition. And we want God to be merciful, and people should be cooperative to make sure the transition is as painless as possible. But transitions are transitions, and transitions often are very, very uncomfortable and often are connected to a lot of shuddering. Again, I say again, we pray that it should be just shuddering without any death, without any loss, if that's possible. But whenever a world is shaking, you can rest assured is a market correction going on. The world is sensing a split. Something's wrong. It's like when a person growing up in a dysfunctional home suddenly realizes that my home is dysfunctional. You know what the first feeling you have? You have a pit in your stomach. More than that, your whole insides can be torn apart. What kind of home did I grow? I thought I grew up in an idyllic and beautiful home. You realize a bunch of abusive people. So would it have been better to live in blindness and denial? For comfort, yes, but not for truth, not for true healing. So what happens? You shudder, you shake. People can't sleep at night. We have nightmares when we remind ourselves of things that we're suddenly aware of. But that's the beginning of the solution. Using the example of the Baal Shem Tov, the spiral staircase, last Shabbos was the 18th of Elul, the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, founder of Chassidus in general, Chassidus and the Chabad Chassidus. And what did the Rosh Hashanah Tov teach? The mashal of the example of the spiral staircase. It's called in Yiddish Schwindeltrepp. Schwindeltrepp means swindling steps. Why is it swindling? Because it swindles us into thinking that you're not reaching the destination. When you walk up a regular staircase, even if it's a very long staircase, the destination is there. You see yourself getting closer. You're going in one line. You go up a spiral staircase, which, by the way, in architecture is a great way to save space. You climb the steps. You keep turning your back to the destination. So right before you're ready to reach the apex, the top, your back is facing the other direction, and you think, hey, I'm as far from the destination as I could be. And if you don't see it through, you may stop right there, and someone will say, what do you mean, 1 more inch? You would have been through the door. But I didn't see it. There's an expression in the verse that says that you're sitting near me, but with your back to me. So you could be right near what you need, but your back is facing. Your eyes are not open. You're not paying attention. Someone else can be miles away, but they know it's there. That's how we have to look at trembling and at shudders and at trembling world that we're seeing today. September 11th, 13 years ago, I began writing a weekly article. And that's how I began. The first article was, today the world trembles, today the world is born. Now we're saying about the world being born as it trembles. It's very similar events. Maybe now it's even more pronounced. But if you trace the steps of those 13 years, these bar mitzvah years, you'll see unbelievable parallels. All happening in the same area, different names, but the same area, same type of battles. And don't be shocked, because you go back thousands of years and hundreds of years, you'll find the same thing again and again. The shuddering continues. What we have to come to terms with and to ultimately realize and bring to fruition is the birth. If one day, and hopefully very shortly, the radical Muslims will come to realize what Abraham taught, that the love is the approach. Inspire people that you call infidels. Don't behead them. Then, I can't say it was worth it. Then the shuddering of this time at least woke us up to another reality. Hopefully this could happen as quickly and as painlessly and bloodlessly as possible. But that's the objective, and that's how Jews have always seen life. We've been through everything. No one has shuddered and trembled as much as Jews have. The shuddering and trembling before the Nazis in the 40s and 30s, Before that, the pogroms, the Inquisition before that, the Middle Age genocides and attacks on Jewish communities. You go back to the Crusaders and the Crusades, and of course the destruction of both temples. Who has not shuddered? Individually, collectively. Thank God for the Jewish people today. We do not have to be afraid. I can sit here and speak to you about Rosh Hashanah. We can go to synagogue. Today our challenge is the opposite. Not shuddering, but too comfortable. That was too much fear, and now it's too comfortable, which leads to apathy. I can never resist, I say this so many times. A guy asks his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he answers, I don't know and I don't care. That's it. Speaks for itself. That's our challenge today, the challenge of comfort. But then we're suddenly reminded that the world is not perfect. There are many cracks. There's much dissonance. But then we come and remind ourselves in the world, that too is part of the process of a wake-up call, a market correction. In Kabbalah, you have the concept of shvirat hakelim, the shattering of the containers. The world of Tohu. Actually, it's right in the beginning of the Torah as well. When you read, Bereshit bara Elokim, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, and then it says what? The world was chaotic and empty, or empty and void. And there was darkness covered the entire existence. And the Spirit of God hovered over what? Pnei hamoyim, on the face of the waters. One of the most cryptic verses you'll ever read. What are you talking about? You just created heaven and earth. What void, what vacuum, what darkness, what waters, what Spirit of God. So the Kabbalah and Chassidus elaborates what this means. It's referring to God creates a world, but this world He created in a way where He concealed His presence. He created an agnostic universe. So imagine an artist or an author writing a book, or an artist creating a piece of beautiful art, or a composer beautiful music. And then they implant into the music and into the art and into the book amnesia. You're going to forget, or at least agnosticism. You're going to question and wonder whether you're self-made or not, whether there was an artist, a composer, or an author. Imagine for a moment. Let's take a type of a mind exercise here. Okay, and the book starts speaking and says, who wrote me? I seem so organized. And you come to the conclusion, maybe you wrote yourself. The book wrote itself. The artist, the music created itself. On the other hand, you say, that doesn't make sense. Nothing can create itself. So that's why the next verse says, the world was in a state of chaos and confusion. Because God created a universe, correct, but He hid His presence. So right there is the first dissonance. This is what the Arizal calls the Tzimtzum Arishan, the great Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is what? That God concealed His presence and allows for another I, capital I, to emerge. The only thing that existed was God-centered consciousness. I wouldn't say God-centered, it was only divine consciousness. Then by concealing His presence, His conscious presence, not unconscious, now an entity can emerge like you and I. Hey, here I am. I'm an entire entity. I'm a personality. When we're in our mother's womb, we don't say that. But then suddenly you pop out, I'm a self-made person. And then I succeeded this, succeeded that. Right there you have the ultimate dissonance. A book that is refusing or is denying its author. So it's dark. Dark here means not just physically dark. Dark means we're in the dark. We don't see clearly. How could it possibly think a book should suddenly really think that it's authored itself? Or wonder? But that's the way God created the world. So the divine plan was creating an agnostic universe. Later, when it would say that let us create the human being, Moses asked God, why would you say let us create? There is no us. You're leaving room for duality, and God says, what kind of answer is that? Those that want to make a mistake, let them make a mistake. Why would you intentionally plant a mistake, say a statement that says we will create, suggesting a plurality when we know there's Hashem Echad, one God? Why would God say if they want to make a mistake, let them make a mistake? because God was not telling us to make a mistake. He created a world that the only way for us to be independent is for us to be able to make a mistake. Or else the book doesn't have any value. Then we're just puppets. So we're created in a way where we possibly can deny the unity that we have with our source, with our creator. And then it's our choice. Those that want to make a mistake and be fools, make a mistake. Because of the fools, I'm going to destroy my world. So it's dark. Tzimtzum. And self-consciousness emerges. I am somebody. Okay. But now, if you do things right, you find your way back. So the next statement says, not all is lost. Hovering above the waters. Hovering above the waters that conceal, because waters conceal what's beneath it, is a spirit of God. So it's not all airtight. It's not an airtight tzimtzum. Tzimtzum b'shvil hagili. The tzimtzum is there in order for you to discover it. But to do so, you'll need a crack. You need to crack existence open. Because the book, the art, the music on its own, it's been concealed from its source. So you begin to struggle. And a struggle is a confusion until you crack open and say, you know something? There's some deeper reality. That's called transcendence. Anyone who experiences transcendence, especially in a serious way, will always know there's a crack. There's always a tremble. Because you're going from one state of consciousness to a transcendent state of consciousness. You're going from survival to recognizing there's something far beyond us. The first time teenagers come to discover, they're very, very disturbed. It's very disorienting. Because you suddenly thought, I thought this was reality, and it's a different reality. Everybody's seen The Matrix. The Matrix was a perfect example of that type of that type of disorientation that happens. When suddenly everything you thought was real, you find out it's not. You don't want to believe it. So there's a dissonance. Eretz Yara, the world is trembling. But there's a Spirit of God. Some voice somewhere is hovering and saying there's something else going on. And you think about it, and it eats away at you. And then what happens? Vayemer Elikim, Yehi Vayi. Then the Kabbalistic language, the Kav. After this darkness, a Kav pierces the Tzimtzum, and a thin ray of light emerges. God said, let there be light, and there's light. That light comes from pre-Tzimtzum consciousness, where there's only divine consciousness, and now it's entered, pierced the darkness of the world. But the dissonance is still there because it's only a kav. It's only narrow light. Think of it like a teacher just teaching, spoon-feeding some information. Then comes a world called, a little later, the world of Tayu. The world of Tayu is a world of confusion because the confusion continues. Verse number 2 still prevails. And that's where there's the shattering of the containers, which is symbolic of any shattering in our life, any shattering of, let's say, your previous paradigm, your previous way of thinking, your preconceived notions. There's a shattering. The shattering on its own is very disturbing. But it's a necessity in a world where there's dissonance. It's a necessity when there's something being hidden, when you know there's some deeper truth and you can't quite place it. That creates a shattering, that's a disturbance. And Tayu, Seisur Amnas Livnes, the shattering, the trembling is in order to rebuild, is to build. Like you raise an old building with a Z in order to build a better building. And that's how destruction is seen. Never as a pleasant and good experience, as a means to something greater. But at the time, it's destruction. To add one more thing, merachefes is an interesting word, the hovering over the water. So the Arizal again says merachefes is the same letters as rapach mes, which means the 288 that died. He refers to the shattering of the containers that leave us 288 sparks, which break down into many more sparks, branch off into many more sparks, which is what our job in this world is, to gather them. So think of this book I mentioned. The book that's not sure about an author. Then someone tears the book up and scatters its pages and its words all over the world. So you have an organized book, but now you have to go and gather them. And that's the work, my friends, that we do. Beginning on Rosh Hashanah. We're reorganizing a chaotic world. Humpty Dumpty, right? Sat on the wall and then fell and shattered, and our job is to go put the pieces back together. Rosh Hashanah is the renewal of existence, but the renewal of the purpose of existence. Today the world is created anew. What today means, the day, because this is the purpose of the great guest, the crown jewel of the human being that has the ability to talk about what I just said. Animals don't change the clockwork that God created them. They don't go down, they don't go up. We can go shatter things, but we can also repair things. Tikkun olam. And that's our job, to repair, to gather together, to understand and see through the trembling. That is, my friends, the objective, and that's the purpose that we are living today. So when you see a world trembling as we do, and we see all the sadness that it brings, and more than sadness, tragedies, we must forge ahead and understand, and we have to teach this to each other and to everyone around us. This is perspective on the events that are going on today. A bird's eye perspective, a bigger picture, to understand the trembling and the tremors and the rumblings and the shuddering as a leading up to an eruption of tremendous good. Not stopping here and seeing it just as an end in itself, or let's just kill all the enemies, but to see it as a step that helps us through this transition. And that's why you find the midrashim that say that when you'll see at the end of times trembling, and people will tremble and say, like the Yalkut Shimoni, that the Muslim or Arab world is attacking others, and we're having wars. Don't be afraid, because this is all leading to Higiyas Mangul Aschem. Don't be afraid. This is all leading to a deeper redemption. Again, this doesn't mean we want this stage, and it should be minimal, but that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. The recognition of this transition, especially in our times. What this means personally is that in your own life, if things are not working so well, don't see that as just as a random thing. See it as a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. If something's not working well, it means that something's wrong. Anxiety is the cry of a thirsty soul. When you're very thirsty, you cry out. When you're comfortable, you don't. So when you're parched, that sense of lack, that void, that ayin, can lead you to a deeper yesh, a new type of experience. Comforts are very nice, but they're not necessarily growthful. So in our own personal lives, we take the same message. You have the toyu, you have the shvirat hakelim, you have the shudders, you have the hayem harat olam of the olam katan za adam, that your personal world is shaking, is trembling. And many of us go through that, whether it's in relationships, in marriage, in our personal decisions, our job, what should we do, a loss, etc. See that as a stepping stone to hayem harat olam, that your small world is also being born today. Rosh Hashanah teaches us that message. So though there are many prayers in Rosh Hashanah, and definitely we can focus on many of them, I focus one that is, I think, relevant to our time, to our experience, to what's going on in the larger world and also in the personal world. And when you repair in your own personal life some dissonance and some rupture, yes, we're taught it has that butterfly effect. It has a ripple effect that begins to repair other ruptures and can even have a global effect. So whatever is happening in the world is happening within us in some subtle microcosmic way. And our behavior has an impact on that world out there and vice versa. So may this year be a truly peaceful year, not just miraculously and magically, that would be great, but we do our part to bring peace in our own homes, between spouses, between parents and children, between community members, between cities and states and countries and empires and nations. Because as I said, we're at the end of the day, every individual, all the 7 billion people on this earth are individuals like us. If 5 of us can find some type of harmony, why can't 50? And if 50 can, why can't 5,000? And if 5,000, why not 500,000? 5 million, 500 million, 5 billion. It ends up being how we behave. And the time has come that we should feel ourselves as being part of the solution. Because you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And being part of the solution means you turn to something outside of the system. You go back to the author of the book and reconnect. V'yoda kol pol ke'ata pa'alta, as we say on Rosh Hashanah. Every Paul, every creation, every creature, every subject of this world, every craft knows that it has a craftsman. Every object knows it has a tailor. Every vessel knows it has a potter. Every intelligence knows it has an author, a cosmic engineer, a composer, an artist. All these are good names. And that's what we can reconnect to that source code. And we bring it back into the structure of existence. Experience total renewal, collectively and personally. God should bless each one of you with a very blessed year. It's been an honor, as always. It's my deepest honor to be able to share our common and mutual journey, to have intersected with each one of you, wherever you may be. You know, you probably know me more than I know you because you see me, you can hear me. Technology has not yet allowed for total reciprocity. But please know that I feel honored. And please share with me any of your thoughts. The more contact you have, the more I can understand who you are. I hope that God blesses me with the strength and power to, and I'm definitely committed to double and triple our efforts, both my own of the Meaningful Life Center for this coming year. And please let us know who you are, what interests you have, how we've been helpful, how we can be more help to you. As I said, it's the deepest honor and greatest dignity to be able to join and intersect in this great musical symphony. Each of you is a musical, indispensable musical note. And when you join together, it's an unbelievable experience. So it's been my great honor, and I hope you've shared the same feelings. Again, please share anything that you may want to suggest or anything that any way we can help you. We plan to do kinds of new projects. We're about to overhaul, we're about to actually launch and unveil a completely overhauled website with great new tools and classes and programs. But your input is vital because it's a joint and mutual journey and experience. If you'd like to help us in any particular way, either volunteering or financial help, it would definitely be real help to make a tax-deductible donation in honor of the new year. You could just go to our website, meaningfullife.com, and you press donate there. That would be an excellent way to help us continue doing our work. But I see it not just as help, but as a partnership. And again, anything we can do to assist you, please feel free to. And I encourage you to take me up on this offer. Everyone should have a very blessed year. Blessed with children, with abundance and parnasa, livelihood, all in good, with good life and good health for many, many healthy years. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you in all the best ways and finding clarity in the events that are going on in the world, in our own personal lives, uncluttering, unblocking the clogs and the obstacles that don't allow us to see our true destiny. Everyone should have a Shana Tova, a very healthy and beautiful year. Thank you very much.